Good afternoon, traders. This is Christian from Hertz Tribeca Trade Group, and this is your end of day recap for Monday, October 5th. And first things first, risk disclaimer in front of you. Everything that we're going through is for information purposes only, not giving out any advice, recommendations. We also have a member webinar coming up here in about an hour. Just about an hour, 5:30. And we'll be going over the market webs. We'll also be going over the watch list program and how we're basically trading that. Like here's our so every weekend I come up with a member watch list, and I know on days like this it's a little bit difficult to chase because the market was up from where Friday left off. Basically so I'm going to go over the whole program of that, but what I basically do is I hold SPY over the weekend. And then I use a portfolio trading system called M1 Finance, and I go ahead and buy all these on the open. And and this kind of worked out again today. It's up 2.5%. Again, we outperformed quite nicely in last week's watch list. So again, that's my goal every week is to come up with a watch list, and it outperform to basically outperform the SPY every week. And what I'm finding is that I'm basically finding a couple names that are really showing some nice momentum. So we'll go over that. Last week our watch list was up 4.4%, right? And we had names like oh no, this isn't right. Sorry, this was earlier in the week. Where was this? Let's go all the way back here. That was, I think, a different part of the week. This is my CF commentary channel, which I provide commentary over the weekend as well as throughout the day. Let's see, where was this watch list from last week? I believe I pasted it in here. Toot 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 toot. Oh, well, maybe it's not in here. Maybe did I put it in here? TTG portfolio. Here it is. Yeah, up 3.8% last week. That was last week's list. So I sell out of that list on Friday, and then I go into SPY. And then I get out of SPY on Monday's open, just so I don't avoid these gap ups, which we've been seeing repetitively now at this point. But this is working quite well. So here's a list today. Plug was a name. I put a couple speculative. I always put a couple high volatile names, just one or two usually. So this week was Plug. I put in, I also put in a name like Gap GPS. So I'll get into some of these names. I'll get into the watch list in just a second. But the averages for today. So anyway, we'll be talking more about that in our member webinar in an hour, as well as the market webs, which I want to talk about. The setup that we saw in the TLT in the bond ETF, but huge outperformance today by the small caps today. Finished up 2.8%. That's a monster day. I do think some of which is this move in bonds is behind that, because what's the biggest component of the small cap ETF? Well, it's financials. What did the financials do today? What did the banks do today? They were up 4% for the day. That's pretty unusual, isn't it? So I think that move in interest rates is going to drive. Remember when we talk about interest rates, I think a lot of retail traders get confused by they're always thinking that, oh, it's what the Fed does for interest rates. Those are short-term interest rates. Banks like a steep yield curve. So when we talk about TLT or the long bond futures, which is ZB and Thinkorswim, what we're talking about is the long end of the curve, right? Not the portion that the Fed controls, which is the front end of the curve. What we're talking about is the CEO of CrowdStrike is coming on soon. Great. On CBC. I'm just just saw that out of the corner of my eye. But so that's very good for the banks, and what the trade has been for banks, which we'll talk about this just for a second, has been to kind of fade strength. However, if interest rates are going to continue to climb here, I don't know. Maybe there's something to this. It's always funny the comments that I get on Twitter. Somebody was saying, "Oh yeah, I'm going to fade the banks." I mean, you could. I have not wanted to, given interest rates and their business, I have not really wanted to go long banks, and I'm not long banks, but I don't know if I want to short them here because look at what's happening with bonds, right? And certainly we talked about this a few times, and if you've watched my videos, we've talked about it's one of the things that we start the day with every day is whoops, what can I bring this up? Is what bonds are doing, and they've been so quiet, you know. And one of the things that we looked ahead to was this value area being super narrow, right? When that happens, that usually indicates a big move is coming. It's a very similar signal when people like to refer to when the moving averages get coiled, right? When you've got three like short-term moving averages wrapped around one another, coiled, usually a big move is coming in one direction. I honestly thought that this move was that bonds were going to go higher here, but they're not. They're going the exact opposite. So I wanted to talk about that for a minute too. But just keep in mind, when you've got a move in interest rates, it affects a lot of different areas, right? Banks and home builders, for example, they don't operate in a vacuum, right? When things like interest rates change, people will go ahead and pile into certain areas of the market. So, and they get out of other areas too, hypothetically, right? They get, once the rates go higher in treasury bonds, which are safer than equities, people get out of a little bit of the higher yielding equities, and they go into treasuries because treasuries are a safer instrument, supposedly. No, I'm just kidding. But that's just basically how it works. I don't think utilities backed off today. Utilities finished up 1%, and this chart looks pretty strong. But again, if you look at what happened with KRE, IWM, again up to, I was not expecting a move in small caps like this. It's going to be interesting because if we go to the weekly chart, IWM, maybe that was a false breakdown on the bottom of value a couple weeks back. They did look like, remember, just literally a couple weeks ago, they looked like they had broken the 200-day moving average. Since they broke the 200-day moving average, it has been a snapback rally in the small caps. So we are now very quickly breaking value to the upside. And you have to think about things too that probably the small caps are a bit underowned. Probably banks are, a bit underowned. So, pay attention to price, pay attention to trend. What I would be looking for in IWM is a break over 158.80 by the end of the week. That would be a break back above the 2020 value area, something that we really haven't been. Price has not been over this value area since the beginning of the year, right? So there was one attempt back here in the beginning of August, which failed, and since then they got hit pretty hard for the whole month of August. All right. So the other thing that I wanted to mention here, as I'm going over some of the price performance for the day, certainly the bonds are highlighted as well. The rest of the averages did just fine for the day. Qs were up 2.1%. But isn't this funny, right? The market, I think, always tends to do something than what conventional wisdom is thinking. Here, I'm thinking, as well as you probably heard about a million other people say, oh, I expect the markets to be choppy. I don't expect them to do that much into the election. And you heard people talk about, I had a few people on Twitter when I posted the chart last week of TLT. They're like, yeah, it's leaning now to the downside, but it's definitely going higher. I'm like, okay, that's interesting that that's what you think, but right, those people on Twitter are so funny that they know 100%. They're so 100% sure. Oh yeah, it's just going down now because it's testing, and then it's going to go higher. Really? Because it's down almost 2% today. But my point is, other than making fun of people that are 100% sure on Twitter, is that really we don't know what's going to happen in the short term. And the best that what I try to do is I try to look above the hood, which is price and trend, and I like to look below the hood at internals for as many clues, that I can find about direction. But ultimately, I'm not going to argue with price and trend. I'm going to follow price and trend. So, despite everybody getting worried about the election and so forth, I probably, the thing that would drive the most people crazy is if, some areas of the market just continue to rally. So, and particularly, I would say, like for a contrarian trade, that would be the small caps. Let's just look at the S&P here for a minute. I talked about in the weekend video for members that we were at a little bit of an indecision area right at the 50-day moving average, but we're leaning to the upside. I actually, one of my ideas is to kind of put on an iron condor just for that, for choppy markets, but which I did leg into today. I started a trade today right around the open, and I may have to adjust that trade, but we'll see. This is just one day, and I wouldn't be surprised too if we get. Remember what happened in the beginning of last week? We rallied in the beginning of last week and gave some of those gains back towards the end of the week. So that could also be in the cards for this week. But I just think it's funny that everybody likes to make predictions, especially short-term predictions, which I think are the hardest ones. But I think price and trend are going to kind of lead you. And as always, I think, looking under the hood in terms of stock selection too, and noticing like if names are starting to look pretty interesting, you know, taking what you think is going to happen in the back of your mind and just going with what is actually happening. I know that's a very difficult concept in trading. It took me years to kind of, stop making predictions and just follow price. Since I've been doing that, I've just been in a much better place altogether. Let's talk about these crazy solar stocks. So, yeah, I am going to have to take some of this trade off. I have this trade on in what's called my Tribeca Trade Group tactical portfolio, which is a portfolio of about 30 names. And I've been long TAN, the solar ETF, probably for about since I put this portfolio together, which is about a year and a half ago. And yeah, well, it's actually coming up on two. It might be coming up on 2 years, so a little bit more than a year and a half. But this is outrageous, right? And what's been going on in the solar ETF, up another 6%. This could have actually been the day to maybe take a target. It kind of seems like, again, I'm not going to make a prediction that this rally is done, but a big gap up after 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days. So I would think that we're going to see a little bit of a pullback here at some point coming. Also, PBW, which I find is a very interesting ETF because it's got a lot of very high volatility names in the clean, in the clean sector, I guess, as you would clean energy sector. This is PBW. We talked about this in the Q&A video earlier today, You got things like LAC in here, JKS, which looks like a hockey stick at this point, SPWR, Blink is another one, right? These two big guys. So there is a lot of solar in here too. But you also have things like SQM and ALB, Tesla, Workhorse. So really interesting ETF. Is it extended at this point? Yes, absolutely. So those were your best performers on the day. We talked about the banks. Biotech kind of joined in here. Anytime biotech gets a deal, it gets small cap. It gets smaller cap names going, and XBI is now pushing to the top all of a sudden one day, right? And you look at this chart and you're like, oh yeah, look at this. It's now just about to break out. So I would keep an eye on this group tomorrow. But isn't that crazy? From where this was on Friday, which looked like an ugly candle, closed below the 50-day moving average, and one day where when they go up 5%, now the chart looks awesome. Isn't that funny how that works? But I would watch this for continuation for tomorrow. Remember, we did see this a couple weeks ago that there was a deal, right? And there was some follow through. This was the first day on that deal. I can't remember what name it was. Another small cap name, and then you had some continuation for a couple days past that. So continuation would kind of get you up here. And IBB, oh, look at that. IBB took out a VPOC. So Virgin Point of Control, funny how that happens. These Virgin Point of Controls are a great tool. I was watching AYX, which announced a new CEO, and I believe they upped their guidance. Take a look at what they did. How did that happen? Right, takes out the VPOC, rises right up to that VPOC up at 150, and then kind of cools off a little bit. Right, these things again, our indicator is is extremely accurate in terms of where a lot of volume is at an average price. So it's pretty amazing how accurate, and you can use this thing, and it really helps me trade a lot, and it really helps me set places where I want to take targets. It also keeps me out of trades. When I see a VPOC is right in front of a Virgin Point of Control is right in front of the price, I tend to avoid the trade for then. Like for example, I'm in Qualcomm, right, and I'm looking at this. So this will be a place where I take a good chunk off, right? This 121.24 Virgin Point of Control. Will be a place where I take some money off the table from trade that I got into last week. Remember last week we saw repeat call buying in Qualcomm. All right, so let's go back just to look at the performance. I think we covered enough of these areas. Yeah, the semis were really hot today. Interesting because they were not. Again, very this market might continue to be tricky like this, right? So I would kind of be prepared for anything over the next week or two. AMD looked not horrible. I talked about in Nvidia that it kind of looked to me like it was forming like a bit of a cup and handle. I threw this chart in the trading room on Friday, and I said, "Huh, kind of looks like a nice retest back." Up 4.4% today, and AMD did quite nice as well. What I would watch for, nice level to watch for Nvidia, is if this thing could break above 443.69. Now it did close there. It did close above there, but that's the level to watch for the week. AMD, I think, is through that level. Right, AMD did make it through all the way through value, which is an impressive move. There's a VPOC up here at 89, 90, and I think there's also one up here. Maybe not, just on the 1 hour. So again, these can give really good targets to shoot for. I mentioned I would go over a few other names. I'll tell you what, let me start off with a name that I think is really kind of funny, but just where I was seeing strength when I went through a lot of my scans this weekend, right? Haynes, tighty whiteys. Look at the consolidation here in this thing. Hey, if you want a contrarian type trade, Haynes brands, I mean, if you covered up the symbol, would you like this chart? I would. Look at this consolidation and a break out of here. Now, the volume wasn't huge, but it kind of confirmed a little bit of the breakout. So 2050, I mean, that's a nice looking trade. That's a nice looking spot for a target. You could also take a target along the way at 1782. And then also, if you look at, what else did I see on here? I think on the weekly chart too, it's right at that top of value, and could be looking to break out of value. So like interesting. Like isn't that like that's not the name that I would think would be on the top of people's lists. But hey, I mean, sometimes you just have to cover up the symbol a little bit because it looks pretty decent. Another name that came up on my scan this week was the Gap, which I did put this one in the watch list and making money on this one. This one was up 4.8%, right? The Gap, and you could look for a target up for the Gap up around 2080 and then 2116, right? So GPS. I do think that there's a little bit of a theme here, and it's athletic leisure. And look at what Hibbett Sports did today. Talk about VPOX. There's another one coming up here. Somebody asked me about, a member asked me about Dick's Sporting Goods. This also looks strong. So it does look like there's a theme going on here. And I think partially, the Gap obviously has a few different stores, but the Athleta store, I think, is probably doing pretty well. if I had to guess. What else from our weekend watch list? Plug, right? Talked about, any of these alternative energy plays. I think you want to pay attention to this, to when if possible these things could break out. Another name that I'm watching is Bloom Energy. I think this thing is ready for a pop. Outside of value, and maybe can get up to 21. Or at least visit these previous highs in here. So I would keep an eye on BE. It's another name that we see a lot of, continue to see call buying in. Again, so these were some of the other names on our list. Again, the home builders. I came into this week. It's funny how you kind of have to change around your ideas, but I thought the home builders looked great coming into today. I think the move in interest rates changed that a bit. And DHI was the underperformer on my list, which I thought looked great coming into this week. So again, just have to kind of change things around. Chewy is one name that I've been in and out of the last couple days. Um, I wanted to just go ahead and reduce my positions going into the weekend, but I think this thing looks pretty good here. It just had an inside day on Friday, had a small, move comparatively to everything else today, but as long as it stays above this 1 hour value area for tomorrow, which is 57.20 or 57.30, I think it looks pretty decent here. All right, guys, plenty of other symbols to go through, but video is 20 minutes long, and we are doing a webinar a little bit later. So I hope to see you guys there if you are Tribeca Trade Group members. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow.